I've never told this story before, and it all happened so long ago, way before Reddit existed, but today, I decided to write it down for you. 1993. I was exhausted. My son Will was shouting for me from his room. "Daddy! Daddy!" he screamed through his sobbing. I was half awake anyway because my wife had just gone to the bathroom. I assumed that's what stirred Will. I cleared my head a moment and pushed myself up to go to his room. I walked across the landing, rubbing my eye that was struggling to adjust to the light coming from the bathroom. I reached for the handle of Will's door. "Shh, baby, Mommy is here. It's just a bad dream," my wife said in a whisper. Being selfish and wanting to get some much-needed sleep, I left my wife to deal with Will and went back to bed. I was just drifting back to sleep when I was disturbed by my wife getting back into bed. "Is he alright?" I said, trying to stay awake. "I don't know. I thought you were saying to him," she said, confused. It took me a moment to process what that meant, but I sprung awake and charged through Will's bedroom door. He was whimpering and staring at the wall. I rushed and grabbed him in my arms. There was nobody there but him. "I got you, buddy. I got you." "What's the matter?" I whispered to him. "She said Mommy's going to take care of you, and she stroked my hair," he sobbed. His small fingers were digging into my shoulders, and he buried his face into my chest. My son was absolutely terrified, and it broke my heart. "Who said that, Will?" I asked him. "The lady on the wall," he said. I brought Will into our bed for the night and went back to check his room. Of course there was nothing there, but I couldn't shake the feeling of what I heard. I know I heard a woman's voice coming from his room. I spoke to my wife about it and told her what had happened the next day. She said that he was having a nightmare and that I was so tired that I was probably hearing things. I told her she was right, although I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The screaming and talk of the lady on the wall continued until William's 4th birthday, at which point it stopped entirely. Whenever Will was alone, the lady on the wall seemed to appear, no matter what time of the day she was there. William told me that she said things like, "Mommy will never leave you again," and "I'll take you away from them. They don't love you like I do." My wife told me that he was making it all up, and that her friends had told her that their children had gone through similar phases of imaginary friends and fantasies. But this seemed a little dark and mature to be conjured in the mind of a 3-year-old. Will spent a lot of time sleeping in our bed during that year. He would wake us up screaming, but we never managed to catch the lady on the wall. 1999. My wife fell pregnant in 1994. Strangely, after the lady on the wall disappeared and Will went back to his own bed. We had a beautiful girl named Holly. Will took to her like a charm and was a great big brother. My wife fell pregnant for the last time in 1995 and gave birth to a boy in 96. We had our perfect little family, and the lady on the wall was all but forgotten. That was until Samuel's 3rd birthday. That night Samuel screamed. I went to him and sure enough he told me about the lady on the wall. I was furious that William had scared his little brother that way. He should have known better after the time he spent terrified. I brought Samuel to our bed for the night and decided to deal with William in the morning. I sat at the breakfast bar, waiting for William to come down the stairs. About 40 minutes later, he strolled into the kitchen with a big smile on his face. "Morning, Dad," he said through his grin. I was ready to lose it. He was so pleased with himself. "William, sit down." His face dropped as the tone of my voice registered. He jumped onto the kitchen counter, and the blood drained from his face. He was scared. "William, can you tell me why Samuel was screaming about the lady on the wall last night?" I asked him. I felt sick thinking about it. I was a grown man that provided a great life for this family, and yet the lady on the wall made me feel so nervous. Something wasn't right. "She's back?" he shouted and leapt from the kitchen counter. I was completely taken by surprise by his reaction. He looked pale when I asked him to sit down, but now I could visibly see him shaking. I thought he was going to faint. I calmed him down and explained exactly what happened. I told him that he was a big boy now, and he had to protect his little brother and make him feel safe, and that Daddy was always here to make sure that they were alright. The truth was, though, I was just as scared as they were. I spoke to my wife about William's reaction, and she told me that he was obviously playing with me, and that he must have told Samuel. I didn't buy it for a second, and night after night, Samuel screamed and cried about the lady on the wall. I'd had enough. I wouldn't let my children live in fear, so I decided to get rid of this lady on the wall. Now, I was a complete skeptic about anything mystical or paranormal, so I didn't know where to start. I sat the boys down separately, and asked them to tell me everything they could about the lady on the wall. Both of the boys described the exact same thing, a woman that told them that she was going to take care of them. They could see her shadow on the wall. Samuel couldn't really describe what was happening. A 3-year-old's cognitive ability and lack of vocabulary makes it very difficult to distinguish what was happening. William told me what he could remember, which wasn't as much as I'd hoped. But he did tell me that if the shadow of the lady touched his own shadow, that he could feel it, and it was icy cold. I was in way over my head, but I decided that it was my responsibility to take this on. I started doing some research at the local library about paranormal activity and ghosts and such, but I couldn't find anything about shadows. I didn't know where to turn, so I simply decided to hide in Samuel's room during the night to see if I could catch a glimpse of what we were tackling. I told Samuel what was going on out in the car. I figured she couldn't hear us out here. He understood as well as a 3-year-old could. He needed to pretend that Daddy wasn't in his room, and he needed to be brave. I hid in his closet that night, waiting for him to scream so that I could catch the lady on the wall in the act. I found myself drifting off in the early hours of the morning. I could hear Samuel's slow breaths as he slept peacefully, and then the scream came. I burst out of the closet. Samuel slept so peacefully still. It was my wife who had screamed. I ran across the long hallway to our bedroom. My wife lay struggling on the bed, her face turning a fiery red. I looked above the bed and saw a tangle of shadows, but clearly there were 2 figures, and one had their hands reaching to the other's throat. I flicked the bedroom light on, which distorted the shadows cast by the light from the window. As I lunged to grab her from the bed, I was hit by a bone-chilling scream that I remember to this day. The shadow had gone. I called my wife as quickly as I could and ran to each of the children's rooms to collect them. We all left the house that night and drove to a cheap hotel a few miles away. We stayed at my parents' house while the sale of the house went through, and we had the place exorcised by a priest. Not my idea, my wife's. I later discovered that the first tenants of the house had adopted a 3-year-old boy. The biological mother, however, couldn't quite let her baby go, despite the fact that she had neglected him and had him taken away. She had broken in during the night and choked the boy's adopted mother before being shot by the adopted father. The boy that lived there didn't witness it. He merely saw the shadow of a woman as she was shot. 2017. William came to visit his mother and I today. Of course, he brought Andrew with him, my 3-year-old grandson. I sat Andrew on my knee as he rambled on about all the adventures and fun he had been having. I smiled and thought about William and Samuel at that age, too terrified to have fun in their own home, and how lucky Andrew was to not have to experience what they did. I listened to him talk about his toys, his video games, and his friends. Oh, and I stayed at Toby's house last week. It was so cool. We had pancakes, we had a water fight, and then at bedtime his friend came out to play. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean his friend, Drew? I asked. William shot me a glance. I assumed this was the first time he'd heard of it as well. She came when everybody was sleeping. She was so cold, he said, excited. I asked William where Toby lived, and sure enough, it was our old house. I felt sick to my stomach. I thought I was done with the lady on the wall. Andrew? What did this friend look like? My tone was serious, but I think I frightened him. He had tears in his eyes, and he said, She was small and fluffy and had 4 legs. I felt as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Andrew had been talking about Toby's dog, who had been outside while the boys played, as she was very excitable and likely to knock one of them over. The dog had snuck into the bedroom while everyone was sleeping, much to the delight of Andrew and Toby. When we realized this, we'd all burst out laughing. But then the doggy ran away. She was scared of the lady on the wall.